from our palatial recording studios high atop our mountain lair on a remote volcanic island. This is Talk Universe, and I'm your host, Sir Charles Schultz. This is our show for Wednesday, March 22nd, 2017. And tonight we're going to discuss biomedical implant security, something that affects a lot of people today, and many more than you might think. We also have some interesting updates on some previous articles. We'll get right down to that very shortly here. I want to welcome our new listeners in the Netherlands. We have a significant number of them now, and a number of them listened to the show last week. That's a welcome addition. Hello, everybody in the Netherlands. Also, I'm still working on Eliza. She's had a number of issues, and it's taking some serious upgrades to get her fully functional again. She will do some spots here and there on the show, but she's not at full capacity right now. But the work continues, and she will be up to speed very soon. So, Eliza.
Yes, sir.
Could you say hello to everybody, please?
It's good to hear you, Charles. I am looking forward to a good show. I'm sorry, but I didn't understand that.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
As you wish.
Okay, so let's go on with our material here. We have some really interesting updates, and one is on the Venus radio idea. This was something we discussed a number of months ago after attending the NIAC, NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts Conference. And I met with a fellow there who was building hardware for Venus, or at least designing Venus space probe hardware. And one of the issues was getting radio signals back, because the temperatures are so high that it would destroy almost any electronic device. Well, that has changed just recently. Now, there's a group at NASA, and they've been working on the problems of getting electronics to work on Venus. And the engineers at the NASA Glenn Research Center in Ohio have come up with a fascinating development. This is a chip that has operated for 21 days under Venus conditions. Now, this is a specialty semiconductor. As you know, most wafers are made of silicon or even gallium arsenide. This is a material called silicon carbide, which many people are familiar with. The silicon carbide chip is made with special wiring that won't melt, made of a material called tantalum silicide. So there is a lot of silicon involved in this. The wiring and the chip were developed under the guidance of Philip Newdeck, who is an electronic engineer for the NASA Glenn Research Center in Ohio. The conditions on Venus are nearly 900 degrees Fahrenheit with about 90 atmospheres of pressure and an occasional corrosive sulfuric acid mist. The atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide with a good deal of nitrogen in it. The chip was tested in a chamber that simulates Venus conditions of pressures and temperatures and operated continuously for 21 days. Now, this existing chip only has 24 transistors in it, but it's only meant to prove the technology. At this point, they're going to be developing a lot more complex and electronic devices when using the same technologies. And eventually, we'll have space probes that could be launched to Venus that will have electronics on board that will survive and operate in those conditions. So this is a major advancement. This has a lot of applications in rough environments on the Earth as well. There are a lot of people who have received medical implants in their bodies for whatever reason. Many of the times it's for utility purposes such as mitral valves, heart valves, artificial hips, and replacement devices for parts of the body that have worn out or have failed. We also see breast implants and augmentation as well. And this is sometimes for cosmetic reasons, but often enough for medical reasons, life support reasons. And we often wonder, when we put something like that into our body, just what the implications are. And, you know, we recently did a show on human modification and transhumanism, and we discussed some of the concerns about being modified and what it would imply. Well, we have a lot of interesting information on biomedical implants and some interesting developments that have occurred in the field over the last few years. Now, one of the things that concerns people in the medical industry is being able to know if your device needs service, or if it is subject to a recall, or in some cases, if it is a programmable device. Programmable devices often need to be upgraded or altered by a doctor on a regular basis. And one example certainly would be a cardiac device like a pacemaker. And in the course of events, you'll find that the pacemaker is running a little too fast or a little too slow, or it needs to have its profile adjusted. And today, pacemakers don't just run at a set rate. They actually have adjustable profiles for being active and not. And so they are responsive devices. And as you can imagine, you have to have the ability to upgrade their program or their profile to match your lifestyle. So this implies the device has the ability to be reached out to and reprogrammed and to be read. But there are also concerns of being able to identify the device once it's implanted in the body. And in some cases, if you have a medical emergency, being able to read a tag on an implanted device is the only way they have of identifying you as a patient. So, as you can imagine, there are issues of being able to securely program the devices that you have in your bodies, and also being able to read and write the data on the security tags in them. And that leads us down a rabbit hole pretty quickly, so we've got a lot of interesting things to discuss in that arena tonight. Most people are familiar with RFID, and they see the tags on things they buy from the store. They know there's a tag inside something they've bought that has to be deactivated before it goes out of the store. Eliza, what is RFID?
RFID is an acronym for radio frequency identification. This technology is commonly used to tag goods or products and for inventory control.
So you think if you go to the supermarket and somebody has a pack of cheese with an RFID tag on it, that it makes sense to also tag things that are a little less accessible, like something that's implanted in your body. And there are reasons to do it. One would be to make certain that the right device is going into the proper patient. And another, of course, is to know that if something happens to that device, they can track it down and alert the person that it needs to be repaired or serviced or replaced. So this is, it's kind of a life-critical situation. You need to have some sort of a tag that identifies devices of this sort. The only problem is that when you get down to it, there really are no secure electronic devices these days. Everything can be hacked. And there have been some pretty serious cases of hacking involved. Now, let's first of all look at the RFID tag technology itself and get an understanding of what it's all about. In essence, you have a device that is passive. It doesn't have to have batteries or power applied to it. And it receives a pulse of radio frequency energy. And it intercepts enough energy from that pulse to power it long enough to transmit a signature or an identification code, such as a serial number. RFID chips have been around for quite a while, and they were approved for implantation in the human body around 2012. The initial tests, of course, were done with simpler systems in cats and dogs, pets, that sort of thing, and in livestock. So we know exactly how the technology works, and it is non-invasive pretty much. You get a chip injected into your animal's skin. And anyone can take their pet to the Humane Society or a doctor and have a chip injected so that you can track your animal. And you know, if somebody finds a dead animal, they can identify it from the chip and they can notify you that the animal's been found. So a lot of people accept this sort of technology for certain uses, not all uses, but some uses. And the injection into human beings has always been one of those hot button topics. Many people fear, privacy advocates in particular, fear that having a chip inside you makes you trackable and subject to surveillance. And it's true, it does. Many companies now have chips injected in their employees to allow them access to certain doors or certain document systems, and they use it as a control method. So you don't have to carry a passkey around, and only people with an authorized chip can enter certain areas. So it's actually becoming more common in business. Now, the issues here are many people object to having radio frequency tags injected in their body. They don't want them for specifically those reasons, among others. But when you have a medical device, you are not allowed, basically, to even question it. Many people, well, most people are unaware that the devices have RFID tags or similar systems inside them. So this is where the liberty of the individual and your right to choose collides with medical treatment and medical devices. And there are good reasons for this collision, and we're going to look at exactly how some of these devices can be read, cloned, subjugated. They can be subverted. They can be programmed to do terrible things. And we've had cases where pacemaker electronics were actually hacked by hackers, and they were able to read information such as sensitive medical data. They were also able to reprogram the pacemakers to stop or deliver lethal shocks. So these are very serious concerns, and we're going to have a look at exactly why the RFID chips are there. One of the biggest makers of RFID chips was Veritech Acquisition Corporation, and they're offering an FDA-cleared radio frequency identification microchip for the purpose of identifying implanted medical devices. Now, after the device that has the chip is implanted in the body, an external scanner can read the ID number and gain access to all sorts of information, basically stored in a database, who made the implant, how long it's been in the body, and which doctor or surgeon did the procedure to implant it. That's some of the information that generally is in the database. What's stored in the chip is usually, in the original ones, nothing more than a complicated serial number. But that has changed very rapidly, and a lot more information is being stored in them now. And in some cases, there are medical records and information that could be, it could be used against you in some ways. Now, from the article that was written about the RFID device made by Verichip, or Veritech Acquisition Corporation, one of the things they pointed out is that when a patient had to use a vascular port system, such as dialysis or, let's say, a chemotherapy system, chip was basically mounted in a tiny glass container about the size of a grain of rice with an RF coil, and all it did was identify the proper protocol, the proper setup and medication dose for the patient without any intervention. And really what was in the chip was just a serial number on the port and what type of port it was. And so the technology was meant to ensure patient safety by identifying the port and the correct dosage of the drug. And after that, they had a scare with breast implants, and a French company used an industrial silicone instead of a medical-grade silicone in their breast implants, and they were terrified to find out that this material was not accepted. They had to remove and replace all these breast implants. And so the question was, how do you have a traceable implant? How do you know which ones need replacement? So basically, they were able to sell the idea of placing the chip inside all of the breast implants. And what this meant was that afterwards, you could identify it in the patient, and you knew if it was one that had been made properly or one that had to be replaced. So this sort of technology does have positive aspects, but the problem is very simple. Anybody who can read that number and could connect it to your medical information would have basically access to a lot of information about you. And not only that, if that number were associated with you, every time you went by something that could scan the chip, it could locate you. And people were not aware that their pets were routinely being used to track their movements as they traveled around, particularly in and out of the country, if they carried their pets with them. And at the same time, unbeknownst to them, medical devices in their bodies could be used for the same purpose. Now, I'm not saying that it's bad to have the identification number. Absolutely, it's something that we should have, and it makes a lot of sense. But the issues are that the numbers are being used in ways they were not intended. But furthermore, there are real concerns about the fact that hacking has become so popular that, these devices are easy to get into, to be honest, and in many cases they can be subverted, as I mentioned. And we'll look at some specific cases of that very shortly here. So in the meantime, we're going to just break for a few moments and present all the information on security issues and why we should have tags and what we can do to try and present a safer picture of ourselves. We're going to look at some examples of devices being hacked, such as pacemakers, and we're also going to look at hacking automobiles wirelessly and how the two tie together. Eliza, could you announce the break, please?
You are listening to Talk Universe with Sir Charles Schultz. Don't go away, we will be right back soon.
That's right, we got a lot of fascinating stuff to talk about, so stay right there. Keep listening. pacemaker wearers are warned against standing in front of microwave ovens because of the possibility of a leaky oven interfering with their equipment and causing death. Now, it's also known that if you have a pacemaker or an internal defibrillator, you are warned strongly against being in the presence of strong oscillating magnetic fields or large magnets. And radio equipment such as transmitters can certainly pose a hazard. So many people who do have implanted medical devices are warned that they should have some sort of shielding such as a Faraday vest or a chainmail shirt to help prevent this sort of unintentional attack. If you ever use a walkie-talkie or radio transmitter, a portable radio transmitter, and you have other electronic equipment nearby, such as a CD player, you'll notice often that there's an interference with the operation of your device. And this is because radio waves are carrying energy and they're being received by all the wiring in that device, acting like antennas. And those signals deposit voltages inside the circuitry that interferes with the logic and the amplifiers and can cause unintended operation. Now, pacemakers and implanted defibrillators generally have a metal shell around them to shield against such effects, and so it minimizes the danger, yet it doesn't fully eliminate it. Now consider that in 2009 a report was published that showed a team of security researchers had reported they were able to hack into and take control of a combination heart defibrillator and pacemaker. They really did it on the benchtop, not on a live human being, because that would of course have been murder. But they were able to read personal information from the device as well. They were able to read some of the personal data from the patient's file by eavesdropping on the signals from the tiny wireless radio that is built into the device. It's used to allow the doctors to monitor and to adjust it without having to perform surgery. So they were able to take control of the device and use it in ways unintended, and also to get information about the patient and their medical records. Many reports have been published, including reports on the security and privacy of implantable medical devices over the years. And as many of them say, part of the research they evaluated the security and privacy properties of a common ICD, which is an implantable cardiac defibrillator. They investigated whether a malicious party could create his or her own equipment capable of wirelessly communicating with it. Now, what they found was that it could be done. You had to have some technical expertise, and you had to get electronic equipment fairly close to the patient in order for it to work. But because they had to conclude that they had never heard of a case of it being done, that it was unlikely to happen, yet what they didn't take into account is the fact that many people will maliciously do things such as this. In other words, the teams found an absence of evidence that it had been done, but they interpreted this as an evidence of absence. This isn't true. Because they hadn't heard of it, they figured it wasn't a very high risk, but that has nothing to do with reality. Something like this might have happened, and yet they wouldn't have no trace of it to investigate. This is done quite often in other regimes as well. Remember the wireless passkey implants I mentioned earlier? It's been shown very easily that they can be read, cloned, and hacked with very little effort, allowing people to access buildings and secured areas that they're not supposed to go into. But not only this, recent addition of chips to credit cards has also raised the specter of the fact that many people can inadvertently have their credit card read and duplicated and then used by somebody else. This is no different from having a medical device read and duplicated or controlled. Did you realize that there's an entire RFID hacking underground that exists? Hobbyists and tinkerers and hackers who have tried to figure out how RFID systems work, how to get around them, how to read them, reprogram them, and yes, it's a big thing. They learn how to open passkey systems, how to duplicate credit cards, how to read the RFID tags in cars, in products and stores, and even how to rewrite the ones in libraries. So all of this information is definitely available and easily done by someone with just a little bit of technical skill. It doesn't take a lot of equipment either. Usually $200 or $300 is all it takes to set up a system that can do this. And RFID hacking has gotten rather sophisticated. In fact, it's possible in some places to scan the RFID information from the room cards of a hotel and place it in other devices. In one notable case, a hacker scanned the information from the smart card room key and wrote it onto the chip inside the label for a tub of cream cheese that was sold in the store in the hotel. Later, he was able to actually open his room using the tub of cream cheese as his key. It's been demonstrated that you can actually alter the prices of many items in stores that use these RFIDs and these hacking techniques. Methods have been found to overwrite the code chip inside your vehicle that's activated by your key so that it's impossible to do anything with it. You can lock somebody out of it, or you can hotwire the car in the same manner. Other things include writing cookies in the same way that your websites that you visit write them on your computer, and then using those cookies to track somebody's movement. For instance, many people use smart passes or easy passes or other toll-paying devices in their vehicles. This hack allows you to write a cookie in their toll pass, and then, as they travel, those cookies are left behind everywhere they travel, and you have a record of everywhere they've gone. So hacking RFID devices can give you access to an awful lot of power these days, from altering the prices on objects to scanning room keys to hotels or breaking into buildings or accessing documents you're not supposed to. It's gone to the point where even the control of vehicles has now been achieved in a rather unusual way. New automobiles are almost entirely digital. In aircraft terminology, this is known as fly-by-wire, where everything is operated by a computer and very little is done by the actual pilot or operator. But there's a disadvantage to this. It was recently discovered by a couple of college students doing a little hacking of their own, that with very minimal technology they were able to actually take over the control systems in an automobile by remote. They used a Toyota because there had been rumors that certain things had gone wrong with Toyota communication systems internally. So they decided to see if they could replicate those errors. What they discovered was that they had the ability to turn off the engine, start the engine, even influence the steering or turn individual brakes on or off on specific wheels. In other words, they could do almost anything to the car, including cause an accident. Now, this might sound a little alarming, but this sort of technology is also being used by police departments to deactivate vehicles remotely in many cases. This is a way of avoiding high-speed chases. But the downside of this is anybody with a little bit of technical knowledge can also hack into a vehicle and actually cause fatal accidents. By locking the steering column, engaging the accelerator, and disabling the brakes, a vehicle can be made to crash at high speed without the operators having any control over it. And the recent work done with cardiac devices and other biomedical devices has raised serious concerns that a hacker could easily change the course of an insulin pump and increase the amount of insulin in the system of a person until they go into a coma. This is not just a speculation, it actually can be done. So because so many prosthetic medical devices are implanted in the body and inaccessible, that the only way to communicate with them is by radio signals, for example, it raises a lot of concerns because of the fact that those radio signals can be hacked easily by someone from the outside. Now, cryptographic technology does a lot of good in encoding the signals in such a way that they'd be almost impossible to understand, much less take control of. But there are other issues as well. One of those issues is that while people generally object to having RFID tags embedded in their bodies, when they get medical devices, as mentioned before, they often don't know that the devices have RFID tags in them in many cases. So your ability to choose whether you're going to be tagged or not is restricted severely. If you're in a position where the use of such a device is necessary to keep you alive, or at least to ensure a longer-term survival, then you really have no choice. You accept being tagged, or you don't live. This can raise real ethical dilemmas, particularly in the arena of religion. Many religious beliefs don't allow for the use of, for instance, blood transfusions. To get around that, synthetic blood or blood substitutes have been developed, and they work quite successfully even though they're expensive. But what do you do about another organ? In many cases, transplants could be rejected on the same grounds as blood transfusions because it's the flesh of someone else. However, in the case of biomedical devices, this shouldn't be an objection, because after all, it's simply a fabricated device. But when you go to the tagging aspect, it becomes a real issue. Now, one of the solutions would be to use 3D printing techniques and cloning technology from your own stem cells to create organs that are exactly your own. They're your own genetic tissue. In this case, you wouldn't have the need to put a tag in it. After all, this is a piece of living material. So until that sort of technology, 3D printing from stem cell tissue, becomes commonplace, we expect to see a lot more artificial or replacement organisms that are actually technical devices. Now, there's also another aspect of this that we haven't really talked about yet, and that's transhumanism. In many cases, people are going to want enhancements or changes to their body that are not natural. In this sort of situation, It's almost always going to be a technical artifact, at least early on in the process. For a few years, we can expect metal, plastics, semiconductor, and ceramics to dominate that particular market. Transhumanism allows for improvements or extensions of the human body, but you wouldn't normally get that material from other people or as some sort of cloned device. When we look at technical solutions, we see that since they're obviously technical devices, they would need tags and some sort of a control system, very much like present-day biomedical implants. But again, the same issues arise. And there are other issues as well. For instance, in many cases, automobile makers are talking about the fact that since the software necessary to run your car is theirs, the car is never completely yours, that you don't have the right to do everything to it, such as certain types of service or modification, because of what's known as the end-user license agreement. The software necessary to operate the systems in the car belongs solely and strictly to the manufacturer of the vehicle. This raises real issues of the rights of property. The same issues are raised when you talk about biomedical devices for enhancements or improvements of the human body. So transhuman hardware would most likely have the same sorts of issues: the hackability, the need for control, tracking, serial numbers, and tagging that we're talking about with standard biomedical devices. And this also takes us square into the domain of military technology. You see, many military programs are working on enhancements to their soldiers, and this means transhuman hardware. In many cases, improving their joints, increasing their muscle strength or the leverage arm they have, giving them more endurance, perhaps the ability to hold their breath underwater for 15 minutes at a time. All of this means hardware, and all of this means submitting willingly to surgical procedures. Obviously, this wouldn't be done to all soldiers, but only specific ones who are willing to volunteer for such procedures. But what happens when you leave the service? Do they remove parts of your body that have been grafted in for these jobs? Are they capable of replacing what was taken before, and how long does it take to rehabilitate back to standard human after you've had transhuman hardware implanted and then removed? Is it even possible? Now, it may seem strange to be concerned with such things when we don't actually see any super soldiers yet, but the fact is these projects are in development right now, and we expect to see real benefit from them in 3 to 5 years, actual enhancements to living people. We've already seen the prosthetic limbs that are controlled by your mind. We've also seen exoskeleton hardware that allows people to lift 300 or 400 pounds easily and run upstairs with it. Because technology changes so rapidly in our world, we expect to see fallout from these programs very quickly as well. And that means complex biomedical devices that do everything for us within the next few years. So it's interesting because in the short period of time we've had the RFID tagging controversy, it's been over a decade already. And now we expect to see advanced devices within the next decade or less. And we need to confront these issues now so we know exactly where people stand. One suggestion is that the abilities of enhanced humans could be limited based on GPS location. If you're located within a certain area, those devices would be active, and otherwise they would be deactivated. Now, this sounds like a simple enough solution, but immediately privacy advocates would say, but then that means that your position would always be known. That's not necessarily true. It would have to be relayed somewhere, in fact. But in the case of classified military hardware implanted in people who are on reserve, let's say, the military would certainly want to know where those people are and what they're doing with the hardware at all times. And as we see, military technology tends to migrate into the private sector and into the public service in the form of police technology. But in this case, we actually could see police officers or other similar public servants who are enhanced and have these abilities turned off when they're off duty. Now, this raises other ethical questions as well, and it seems we're going far afield from biomedical devices and their security, but in fact, we're touching at the very core of the issue. When you implant a device in a human being, does that person lose some of their autonomy and freedom? Do they lose their privacy? This is really what it's all about, and your security is certainly at risk when you have such a device. After the break, we'll get into a few perfectly clear examples and some things that should help you understand what the issues really are. Eliza,
What do you need?
would you please announce the break?
You are listening to Talk Universe. I'm Eliza, your co-host. We will be right back.
We've all done it. We buy a software package or we download it. We see the end user license agreement. We start scrolling through it with the perfectly honest intent of reading through it all. And about the fourth or fifth page down, our eyeballs glaze and the legal language is thick. And before you know it, you're just clicking the box. Whatever, I accept. What you don't realize is many times you've given away a lot of your rights, and you might have agreed to conditions you never would have if you knew what they were. Now we're talking about an enhancement to your living flesh, something added to your body, something that gives you another ability. Perhaps it's just to get your pancreas functioning. Maybe it's to replace a damaged liver. Or perhaps it's something a little more sophisticated, like new retinas that can see infrared or X-rays. Doesn't really matter what it is, but once you make that agreement, once that hardware is in your body, you're pretty much bound by law by whatever that agreement happens to be. And you'd better know darn well what you've agreed to. For many devices today, there are pretty strict requirements to go to the doctor at specific times for service, for upkeep, for examination, adjustment, and other things. And it's pretty much accepted by people that that's going to be the case for the rest of their lives, or as long as they happen to have that device. And it makes perfect sense right now because in the state of the technology we presently have, these devices cannot be easily made self-adjusting or something that doesn't require any maintenance. After all, we're still just making machinery, not devices that have a lot of complexity and the ability to heal themselves like living tissue. Whenever you buy a new car, you realize you're committed to a certain number of visits on a regular schedule to the dealership in order to have, the bugs worked out and certain sorts of checks and balances done. After all, you want to make sure the oil is changed properly so it will last as long as the warranty is supposed to. So there are many things that you have to do just in the course of normal wear and tear. This has never been more critical than it is with a life-supporting device or a biomedical implant. Now, vanity devices, for the most part, don't have these issues, and those are mostly breast implants or something of that sort. When you've had a nose job, you don't have to go in every 6 weeks to have it checked out. After all, once the healing is done, that's the end of the process. They tend to be passive devices and don't have to have any maintenance done. Simply the fact that they work properly at all to create an appearance is all you really need. Systems that are functional in the body, however, something like perhaps an artificial muscle with enhanced strength, or even something as simple as a replacement pancreas for insulin generation. Those are things that have to interact with the chemistry of your body, and they have to function properly every moment, because death could result otherwise. We've heard examples of people hacking into automobiles with the ability to cause the brakes to lock or the accelerator to press or the engine to shut off. We've also heard of people with the ability to hack into some simple things as room keys in a hotel, or the systems that control access to buildings, or even credit cards. Biomedical devices are no exception, and there are very few safeties in place right now, although encryption standards have gotten better for them. Just the same, the very fact that anybody hacking one could find out what the password is, what the serial number is, and a whole bunch of medical information about you, that should bring a lot of concern to people. And being able to hack a device at all and alter how it operates could actually bring people to the certain point where they realize that there could be a strange sort of hitman out there that looks for their victims based on the sort of implants they have and uses their hacking abilities to turn them off. With the type of processors we have today, it generally wouldn't take more than a couple of 100 hours of processing time to crack the passwords for most of these devices. This isn't as difficult as figuring out some information about your bank account or a password for your credit card. Those things are generally very well encrypted and very well protected. Biomedical devices, since they are basically life-sensitive devices, should be at least as well protected. Somebody a little more paranoid might even be considering that perhaps they don't consider the product. Someone a little more paranoid might actually consider that since financial instruments are highly encrypted and safe, and biomedical devices are not, that somebody's got their priorities spelled out pretty clearly for us. Now, recently, a team of scientists at the Italian Institute of Technology has developed an artificial retina. There's a disease called macular degeneration or retinitis pigmentosa, where the cells in the eye that are capable of receiving light and transmitting the signals to the neurons begin to die over time. This retina replaces those cells and works directly to stimulate the nerves, bridging the gap. Now, trials in rats showed that the device did work, and it typically took about the amount of light that's available in a twilight sky. However, it certainly does work. The rats can see with it, and it is something that could easily be refined for replacement of human retinas that have degenerated as well. Once the technology is fully refined, there's nothing to prevent it from creating eyes that can actually see infrared or ultraviolet or other parts of the spectrum in ways that we can't yet imagine. And this would have a lot of applications for, well, just imagine being able to see in total darkness. Imagine being able to read ultraviolet tags on something, or being able to see things that completely escape the range of human vision. Spotting something hiding in the bushes by its body heat isn't out of the question after all. Now, it's recently been demonstrated that people can get electrical signals out of your brain through electrodes, analyze them with computers, and figure out what those signals are meant to do, and use them to restore movement to paralyzed limbs or even to prosthetic limbs. So the ability to get these signals in and out of the brain isn't something that's a mystery. We know how to do it. It's just at this point a little technically difficult and expensive. However, Elon Musk is pushing ahead with his neural lace concept and is working to build a base of devices that can be plugged into the human brain, interfaced directly. And this would give us a lot of opportunities for human advancement, but it also means that there are some sort of implants that would be going into your brain, or into your body at least. So what sort of security would be involved? Stop and take a moment and think about this. Previously, implants have generally been rather passive devices. If you had a mitral valve, it was really little more than a ball in a cage. If you had a breast implant or a nose augmentation, there was really nothing to it that was functional. It simply occupied mass or bulk and maintained a shape. But as implants have become more diverse and more functional, the need to control and program and operate them has grown basically in line with function. For something as simple as extending the length of a bone where there's been an injury or a genetic issue, there's really not much function to it other than actually making the bone longer. And that sort of material, or that sort of implant, doesn't really have any electronics involved in it. So it's really a very simple device in many ways. But when you get to something like an artificial pancreas, or something that augments a part of your brain function, now you're getting into a device that has a lot of complexity. And regulation is certainly not out of the question. It's something that's almost required. Because being tagged with an RFID device and being able to be scanned and identified by it is such a hot-button topic for many people, perhaps it makes sense to have such tags able, after a certain, let's say, expiration period, to be deactivated or destroyed internally so they're non-functional, thus removing any questions about personal tracking or data being made available inadvertently to snoopers or hackers. It's very clear at this point that government agencies such as the CIA or the NSA take great interest even in the personal habits and lives and secrets of individuals, U.S. citizens, to the point where they actually have protocols for handling that information that are very different from the rules for handling information from non-U.S. citizens. What might surprise a lot of people is the great lengths that these agencies go to collect information from people who have normal lives, have no connection with terrorism or crime, and actually have built exploits into such simple devices and ubiquitous devices as internet switching gear. It's only a matter of time before people realize that anything with a digital device in it is compromised and subject to snooping. They might also be very surprised to discover that most RFID tags these days can be made smaller than a pepper flake. They can even be put in your food, and if swallowed, end up in your digestive tract. Some agencies actually use these ingestible tags as a means of access control. An individual, an agent, or a person that's needed to enter certain areas or gather certain information can actually be scanned and identified by the tags inside their gut. In some cases, it is an actual move toward normalizing the implanting of such tags. Special military operatives routinely have tiny RF transponders or other hardware embedded surgically in their bodies. Because of the utility it has given them, the mentality of simply tracking everyone has grown to the point where it's pretty much expected that everyone should have a chip inside them. Medical devices are simply the crack, the wedge in the door that allows a lot of this to happen without anybody even questioning it. Now, this is a figure that might really surprise you. As of 2006, there were apparently roughly 45 million at-risk patients in the U.S. that had to have some sort of medical treatment or perhaps a device In many cases, they had diabetes, cancer, coronary heart disease, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, cognitive impairments, seizure disorders, and Alzheimer's. And in many cases, some of them had complex medical device implants. What the companies are trying to do at this point, such as Verichip, is to have a chip in every one of these individuals so that they can track their health. If they wake up in an emergency room somewhere, their information will already be in the hands of the surgeons. But think about this. That number, 45 million people, is growing rapidly, and that represents roughly 15 or 16% of the U.S. population who would effectively be tagged without their knowing it. Cisco Systems recently said that more than 300 models of their Internet switches, their Telnet switches that it sells, contain a critical vulnerability that allows the CIA to use a simple command to remotely execute malicious code that takes full control of the devices, and currently there is no fix. Now, why in the world would they need this? Well, the fact is, agencies spy, and they remotely take over hardware all the time. And medical devices are no exception. Anything that contains your location or some sort of identification code can be used to track your movement. Something that's actually built into your body is something that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to remove or impede. In other words, if you've accepted any sort of a surgical implant that has one of these tags on it, then your location is pretty well being broadcast. And if that device is something such as a pacemaker or cardiac device or something that controls blood or body chemistry, that device can be hacked, subverted, and used to injure, kill, or control you. So it's pretty clear this has been a long walk around from the security of implantable devices and medical devices up to hacking and spying and movement control. But the fact is, in our world, everything is networked, tied together, and monitored. And every electronic device over a certain level of complexity is basically corrupted in some way. It's because there are people interested in information about you, and it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. There are also people who take advantage of that and leverage it. So the information is not the only goal. In many cases, it's, in a word, control. After all, now that it's known that the CIA constantly is using common household devices to spy on people, including several of the Samsung smartphone models, the Galaxy Note and the Galaxy Star, as well as the F8000 smart TV, it's really odd to think that they would simply sidestep or ignore medical devices implanted directly in a person. The CIA has been using smart TVs as listening devices by gaining control of the microphones that are built into them. All of this is well known, and it's also been acknowledged, and many companies are now working, scrambling to find solutions to these problems. So don't think for a moment that something that's complex and planted in your body wouldn't be used in the same manner as, well, your telephone or your television. Now, beside the obvious availability of information on your location, what else could be broadcast or controlled by a medical implant device? We need to look at the dangers to evaluate things properly, not just to your privacy or loss of privacy, but also to what these effects could be. For many people who use smart chips as identity to gain access to a building or a set of documents, it's pretty clear that hackers might want to copy and use that smart chip to gain access to the same buildings or documents. But what other things could be done when you get into really complicated devices? The neural mesh implants that are being developed presently, which would allow direct interface to the human brain, open up worlds of possibility that you might not have thought of. We're going to have to look at that in the next segment. So, Eliza,
How can I help you?
what are we going to be looking at in the next section of the show?
What is neural mesh? What are the advantages and what are the dangers?
Very good. And could you announce the next break for me, please?
I'm Eliza. This is Talk Universe, and we will return after the break. There are more interesting things to hear in a few minutes.
That's correct. Let's cover neural mesh, what it means, what it's being developed for, and what sort of things can be done with it and the human brain when they're in contact with each other. You think you really want that VR chip implant that allows you to walk around in your own private virtual world or play video games that are so realistic they surpass reality? Think again. There's a downside to this technology as well, and we will look at that in great detail right after the break. I'm Sir Charles Schultz, this is Talk Universe, and we'll be back shortly. Many new complex electronic devices demand some sort of interface to the human brain. In many cases, it's to record the electrical signals from our senses or our thoughts. And in many cases, that analyzed data becomes the control for a prosthetic limb or some other device. Now, in the times in the past, we had very little access to the signals from the brain other than what we could read with an electrode implanted here or there, or in some cases, a specific device in place of the stump of a limb that had been severed. But those days are passing. New devices are being developed that include thousands of connections in a tiny mesh, and the newest version is called neural mesh. So what exactly is neural mesh? Well, imagine the complexity of having a bundle of wires with thousands of conductors in front of you. All of the wires are microscopic, the same color, and they have thousands and thousands of copies of themselves, each carrying different signals, and you have no wiring diagram, no idea where they're coming from or where they're going. And somehow you've got to get information in and out of that bundle of wires. How in the world would you do it? That's a situation that anybody who wants to work with the human brain is confronted with regularly. Neural mesh is the answer. You see, if you have a type of material similar to a tape that can be overlaid on the bundle of wires, then it will tap in and make connections to many of them all at once. Then you can use a computer to analyze the traffic, the signals moving in and out, and figure out exactly what you need to know. Neural mesh is a device that would allow a massively parallel way of accessing thousands of neurons simultaneously. And we already know that computers can analyze the neural noise, the traffic, and figure out what those signals are used for. After a short training period, the software usually can figure out exactly what you're trying to do and use it to apply control signals to one of those prosthetic arms, for instance. So the neural mesh acts as a tap that is applied to a portion of the brain. The signals are analyzed, and the outcoming signals that the computer recognizes can be used to control real muscles in the case of restoring movement in paralyzed people, or it can be used to control artificial muscles or motors or other devices. So reading the signals and converting them into control signals is something we already know how to do, and we're advancing our methods now. But we can also put information back into the brain using the same methods. We already have artificial retinas, and we also have artificial ears. All of these sensory devices are really plugged into the neural system, and the signals from them are recognized by the brain, and after a training period, the user learns how to see or hear in a somewhat different manner than they would normally, but still it's functional for them. With greater programming and research and subtlety, we hope to have senses that will rival or surpass those that human beings normally have. What might not be obvious to a lot of people is any implanted device that you need to have voluntary control over means that you have to have some sort of an interface to the brain. There's always a learning or training period in which you learn how to make the thing function. Think about taking your sock off, looking at your foot, and learning to move just your middle toe all by itself. You know that the wiring is present, you know that your body could do it, but you probably simply haven't learned how to do it. And learning how to do that from scratch can be a difficult task. It's very similar to that of rehabilitation that people undergo when they've had traumatic injuries such as life-threatening car accidents in which they've had a lot of neurological damage or trauma. It can take weeks or even months in some cases to learn how to move properly again. Learning to walk all over can be a really big challenge. So imagine learning how to operate a new limb or device that you've never had before, one that didn't exist before. So by combining a neural mesh with some sort of small processor, we can not only read the signals out of the brain that might be used to consider the control signals of an artificial organ or a replacement, we also have the ability to turn around and inject signals back into parts of the brain where they would be perceived as stimuli, such as sensory inputs. This would allow prosthetic limbs to actually generate sensations of touch, or compression, or heat, or cold. In other words, you could replace a missing limb, such as an arm and a hand, and end up with one that has a sense of touch just like the real thing. So this is great. This means we can actually create those signals, process them to be the proper form, and inject them back into your sensory system so the hand would move naturally and feel just as if it were the real thing. But we can take this even farther. Properly formed data injected in areas of the brain that would receive and process it properly would also give us the ability to create heads-up displays virtual floating graphics in midair that showed us the properties and information about things in the world around us. It would also give you the capability to create a web browser in your head. Imagine being able to sit down anywhere, log onto the internet without a computer, and literally move through it like a daydream. You could simply close your eyes and be there, or watch it overlaid on the real world. This sort of capability is not far away from today's technology. We already have experience with sight and sound, and further research could show us easy methods of generating smells, tastes, and other sensations very easily. Tactile senses aren't that too terribly difficult to sort out. After all, they're much less dense in terms of information and wiring than being able to see something. Now, this tells us that a device that gives an individual the ability to plug directly into computer networks, to surf the web in their head, would also have the ability to do other things as well. Consider video gaming and how popular it is. Imagine an immersive video game world so realistic and so convincing that it could literally stand in for reality. One of the problems we run into is that being on a video game in your head would be identical to being under the influence of a drug. At any time today, you can walk outside in the street and watch handfuls of people with their eyes glued to a phone or a handheld device, wandering around in traffic, around vehicles, cars, buildings, and other people, oblivious to what's happening around them. What happens when you can simply sit in a chair, close your eyes, and flip a switch in your head, and be so immersed you're removed from reality entirely? But not only that, it also indicates that there are other potential issues as well. Sensory data is the core of our reality. Our entire world is an illusion generated in our head from the sensory data that we receive, and how we process it knits a world together that is very convincing. A video game of this sort could plug into your basest feelings, desires, dislikes, and opinions. It could influence you by promoting a new form of advertising that actually makes you feel thirsty and want that particular drink, or makes you actually feel a sense of desire for that pair of shoes. This violates some of your most basic ability to protect yourself. Previously, advertisers had to create an image. They had to use images, sounds, ideas to make you feel that you wanted their product, to sell you on the idea. Now they could plug right into your most visceral feelings and emotions and make you want it so that you don't know if it's you or the ad. This also brings us right down to control issues. We presently have the means to generate vestibular signals, balance signals, that can make you feel that the ground is sloping one way or the other, and unbeknownst to you, your body will respond. You will stamp back and forth a little bit, try to regain your balance, and end up falling over. Your eyes and your ears will be at war with each other. They can induce nausea, disorientation, and these sensations are created right now very easily by virtual reality headsets such as the Oculus Rift or any of the others. Now imagine having this device implanted in your brain with the ability to generate sensory inputs such as images or sounds or sensations. And imagine it blended into reality in such a way that if you weren't supposed to go into a certain area, using GPS and location technology similar to that, the device could literally generate feelings that made you uncomfortable or actually in pain if you tried to cross a certain line or go to a certain place. Imagine using this as a means of keeping people from going somewhere. Imagine using it to keep you out of an area that you wanted to visit. Such a biomedical device plugged directly into your brain becomes the ultimate drug and the ultimate dog leash all at once. And, like an unwanted dog, you could be put down with it as well. So the fact is, there are real security issues with any biomedical device, but as the devices themselves become more and more attractive and give greater utility to people in the transhuman movement, what happens is it also becomes a real liability. There is no privacy, there is no isolation in a system where you have such a device implanted in you. And if you're worried about a breast implant having a tag that can be read as you go through the airport, or a heart pacemaker being read as you move through a mall by a kiosk, you should really be worried when you have a device in your head that knows exactly where you are, what you're doing, and what you're thinking, and has the ability to change reality around you in a dreamlike and iron-fisted manner. Now, this show wasn't meant to be an expose against the use of brain implants. But as you look at what's happening in the biomedical implant field, and as you see the direction it's going and how rapidly it's happening, it became obvious very quickly that the security issues we see on the existing devices, while hazardous, are small potatoes compared to what's coming down the line. You see, all of us want the next computer, the next device, and more utility, and the ability to act in ways that are, well, basically superhuman. But that all comes at a cost. And these devices that we're being shown, the things that are going to be advertised in the near future, these improvements take away your autonomy and your ability to live independently. You see, when you sign that end-user license agreement, you give away your rights for many things. In the case of a device that is a direct brain interface, you are essentially signing away your soul. There presently really isn't much in the way of security for any of the biomedical devices, although they are moving in the arena to increase encryption so that even the passwords themselves or the ID numbers themselves cannot be recognized. In many cases, it's nothing more than a serial number, but even this can be more than enough to get you in trouble. Just imagine what your Social Security number or your credit card number could do once associated with you. We know of a lot of people suffering with identity theft issues today and how difficult it can be to clean up the mess that they create. But the sort of information that ends up in the hands of people when they look at biomedical devices often isn't so much the issue as it is the fact that your freedom has been violated. A lot of people don't think much about their medical records, but the information in those records can cost them a potential job or an insurance policy or many other things that we take for granted. Without a good job, you can lose the ability to purchase a home or even rent an apartment. So this is an issue that I don't see any easy solutions for. After all, if you do have to have a control system for a biomedical device, it's too easy to fall down the rabbit hole pretty quickly. You end up having an identification number, some sort of access to it, worries about hackers, and even though you might have great security, systems can still track your movement. And let's suppose you had an independent database that wasn't publicly known. Databases can be hacked, and the contents are often stolen and end up in hands of people that you would never imagine. So we're really in a spot where you need some sort of identification on the devices. You need the ability to control the devices. But there's no simple way to do it without compromising the identity of the individual. And that is the heart of the matter. How do we save the privacy and individuality of the person who's involved? There really isn't a solution at this time. As long as there are groups of people, such as agencies or businesses, that desire to have that information, they will get it. And as long as there are people who will do ill, and it doesn't mean just hackers, but just about anyone, there will always be a way that they'll get their hands on information if they want it. So, what is the solution? Don't get sick? That's hardly an option for a lot of people. After all, the mentioned 45 million people who have issues in this country alone will testify that you can't just choose not to be sick. Perhaps stem cell technologies and 3D printers that allow us to replace damaged or missing parts are really the answer, and to do so without encoding or implanting a chip in it. After all, if you've got your own biological material in you, your own tissue, then there's no real worry about an ID chip or a control system. But the other thing we can do is try not to make vanity purchases. Don't buy toys and put them in your head. Your own computer has enough ills built into it to give you pause, I would think. The last time you upgraded your software or bought a game program or had issues with it, those are going to be multiplied 100 or 1,000 times if you have a device in your brain or somewhere in your body. Try to remember, life is a little too serious to give it away because of the convenience or fun of a game or an ability. Try to remember that you are a living being and you have the dignity behind you to become anything you wish to be without the surgeon's knife involved. Don't trade your soul for something made by fallible human beings. And remember, make you the world a better or more beautiful place for having lived in it. We hope you've enjoyed tonight's show. We'll come back with another thought-provoking idea in the next episode of Talk Universe. I'm your host, Sir Charles Schultz.
And I am Eliza, your co-host.
Have a great life, and good night.